And I want to turn things back to the late, great skeptic and magician, James Randi, the amazing Randi. He dedicated his life to exposing fraudsters, whether it be faith healers, mediums, psychics, or any type of paranormal activity. Two famous examples that come to mind are Peter Popoff and Uri Geller. Can you tell our audience a little bit about James Randi and his foundation, the prize that he offers people, and also why some of these charlatans like Popoff and Geller are still very successful after they've been exposed as frauds?
No, they're not very successful. You shouldn't tell your audience that.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, no, they're not very successful at all. Peter Popoff has never gone back to doing what he did with the fake healing. He sells like miracle water.
Miracle water, yeah.
Geller's retired and he's just a joke now. So yeah, Randi was a dear friend of mine. He wrote the introduction to my book, Psychic Blues. So I've known him since the late 70s, and just a fantastic person. We used to have so much fun talking magic because, he's a very famous magician for a long time. So whenever we would get together at conferences or meetings or whatever, we would always sit down and have a meal together and just laugh and laugh. And we knew all the same magicians and all the scams that were going on. And he was just an absolutely fantastic person to be involved with, because the currents of skepticism that rotated around him were always eye-opening. No matter where I went, I met the most fantastic people. So he was a showman, and that's what I try to do. I don't like debunking. I don't like that word. I think that it soils the image of somebody who's searching for truth to say, oh, he's just a debunker, which is what people will say. So Randi didn't like it either. What we are is we consider ourselves science activists. And what we're trying to do is get people to realize, like I said about magic, is the trick of it is more interesting than the so-called supernatural payoff. When you understand what's going on, it becomes almost humorous when you see these people work and you know what they're doing. And I don't say I know everything. Believe me, I can still be fooled by the simplest magic trick. But I usually understand that what is more likely, that is a term that I use, which is if I see something that I don't understand, I want to investigate it. But I also say to myself, what is more likely? Is this person talking to the discarnate soul of a dead person, or are they just a very clever manipulator of facts and human nature? And that works for me. But I've come upon things where I say, what is more likely? And I just don't know. And then I'm prepared to say, I don't know, I don't.
You're kind of agnostic.
What's that?
You're kind of like agnostic about it, but you lean towards.
Yeah, no, I am an agnostic. Believe me, I'm an agnostic bordering on atheist.
Sure.
I'm pretty clear on what's going on, but I don't like atheism because it says, I know.
Right.
I don't know. The older I get, the more I say, I don't know really what's going on at all. All I can do is follow the facts and look at the science, and then I can make my opinion based on that, but it's only opinion. Several years ago, I had my first experience. Well, it wasn't really my first, but I had a hypnagogic dream. Are you familiar with that?
No.
That's where you go to sleep and you wake up, but you're still asleep and you can't move.
Oh, sleep paralysis.
Yes. Yeah, sleep paralysis.
Right.
Oh. And I was visited by a ghost named Thomas that got into bed with me. And the whole time I'm pinching myself and going, you're a skeptic. This is impossible. Wake up. So for like 2 or 3 days after that, I was totally stunned. I was just like, what was that? But then I had to back up and say, you know what it was. You were paralyzed, sleep paralysis. But from that point on, I had a great respect for people who experience these things but don't understand the science of it. It was real to me. I mean, it was so real that I was challenged by it. And so now I understand alien abduction. I understand the demon that sits on your chest in the middle of the night, the spirit that's at the end of the bed that's watching you. I mean, I lived on the 3rd floor of an apartment building, and how this started was, I don't know if you have a cat, but you know, you're in bed and the cat jumps up on the bed.
Right.
I had this feeling that something jumped up on the foot of the bed. And I'm like, no way, the windows are closed, you're on the 3rd floor, you don't own a cat. So that started the whole thing. Really amazing. I will never forget it.
Yeah, what's interesting is that, so in Jewish tradition, there's this, the idea, there are some who believe in demons, but usually whenever the mythology, you know, is discussed, it usually takes place in a, like, in a person's kind of, when they're alone. Like, for example, it says, like, when you're in an abandoned building, watch out for demons, right?
Yeah.
So it's always like, because what happens when you're alone? You use your imagination. That's all you have. You don't have to,
right.
You're not utilizing your rational mind, and any noise you hear in the dark is like, oh, what's that?
Right.
So the demon is kind of the shadow that follows you around, that you put into your own head.
That's right.
Yeah, and
well, that's why I say that 2.5% that believe don't question any of those things. They believe in Bigfoot and Elvis sightings, and you know,
right.
It all just drops into their brain, and they just shadow people, flat Earth. I mean, it just is. Just,
once you're a conspiracy theorist, you believe in every conspiracy. I find that to be true. The people that I know, they're just like, okay, so now everything is a conspiracy. So they don't, they've totally, you know, disconnected from reality. That's the danger of superstitious thinking and not unscientific thinking. I actually wanted to point out another thing that you mentioned, atheism. So there's a rabbi who lived like last century. His name was Abraham Isaac Cook, and he said that atheism is the best friend of Judaism, because it's the rejection of any, because we believe in God, a transcendent God, and we can never understand it. He doesn't even have a name. We call him Hashem, the name. He's not in this world. He's completely, you know, and it is like one step away from atheism, because we have to reject any notion of supernatural that is not God. Anything that, right? So it's very similar. It's like kind of the God of Maimonides. I don't know if you're familiar. Like Spinoza, for example, who was a Jewish guy who kind of went off the Jewish path, but he believed
big time skeptic.
Big time skeptic, right? He probably invented skepticism, but he was a pantheist, so he believed that God is nature. We don't even believe that. We believe that.
I tend to flow in that direction.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, there's a lot of people who do, and there's no, you know, there's really no, like, there's no. Everybody has the right to their own opinion, but from our point of view, actually, so we're kind of the quote unquote rationalist Jews, if that makes sense. It doesn't really make that much sense.
Well, I should tell you that my son was bar mitzvah.
Oh, really?
Oh, nice.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so I'm very familiar with the Kabbalah and, you know, all those things.
Right.
But I never converted or anything like that. But I'm familiar with that world.
Right. So
world.
We're actually, the Kabbalah is something that, like, it's for obviously a different show, but it's
exactly.
It's not accepted.
Let's not even start with that.
Yeah. But it's not accepted by all groups, and it's not like it's a separate.
Well, I wasn't married into an Orthodox family. Otherwise, I would have had more trouble than I had just as the goyim, you know.
Yeah.
But of all the religions I've experienced, I think Judaism is the one that seemed to make the most sense.
Right.
Because of that skeptical aspect, you know, and the fight against dogma. So.
Yes.
You know, but it still has a supernatural aspect to it that is just, I just don't like it that when anybody says this is the only path. But you know, we're getting into theology. We're getting away from.
It's okay. Listen. I think it's important, because people who are listening are probably wondering, how can we converse? How can we meet in the middle? So I think I would love to just touch on that a little bit, because.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you don't mind,
No, I just. I just, religion, organized religion to me, it's just a control mechanism.
Sure. And there's aspects to it that we agree,
Yes.
actually.
Yeah, I'm sure you do.
There's a, for Judaism didn't really start out as a religion. It was
Mhm.
constitution. The Torah was a constitution for people living in the ancient Near East at that time. And,
Right.
and it developed into a religion, in exile, once we were exiled from our land, because the majority of the laws had to do with living in the land of Israel. So once we had it became a whole new ballgame. And then obviously with Christianity, everything kind of became, compartmentalized into a religion. Okay, this is this religion, this is that religion. But Judaism is not a proselytizing religion. We don't believe it. You have to believe in what we believe in. Otherwise,
no, I know. I just meant that religions are compartmentalized, and I think that spirituality is a very personal thing.
Absolutely.
I mean, one of the things I learned is there's religion and there's spirituality. Religion is, to just simplify it, is about people who believe in heaven and hell. Spirituality is for people who've been there.
Yeah, right. Absolutely.
And spirituality can encompass all of the best parts of all of the religions, because I took some courses in phenomenology when I was going to art school.
What is that?
Phenomenology is the study of, blending all the great religions of the world and trying to come out with something where all the threads go
like a
together.
global religion?
No, this was way before that. This was in the early 70s. One of my teachers was James Hurtak. I don't know if you've ever heard of him.
No, never.
He was one of the guys who deciphered the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Oh, wow.
Very interesting man. But he went off the deep end and got into UFOs and everything. So I lost track of him.
Wow. That's so interesting. Well, actually, so one thing I wanted to touch on before we move on to the next subject was actually prophecy. According to Maimonides, they actually take place in dreams and visions.
Yeah.
So it's the greater prophet is a person who's able to take what they experience. They see this as some type of message. Like it happens to me, like I think of something and then it does happen, like 2 weeks from that, whatever it is. There are some strange things that happen in our dreams that kind of predict things. And the prophet is a trained, at least in Judaism, is a trained student of prophecy who, from a young age, he has to learn how to decipher these kind of messages. And the greater the prophet, like the greater the prophet is, the less interpretive aspects he needs to utilize. He kind of it becomes more natural to him.
He trusts his
intuition. What Benji's
intuition.
trying to say is that that Maimonides actually views prophecy as a sort of a science. There's a scientific element in that they learn how to prophesize and how to interpret. It's not just like someone just had a
it's not about predicting the future. It's about understanding cause and effect and being a chess player and seeing like if this happens then this is going to happen, and if that happens then that's
what Euripides said. The wisest seer is he who guesses well.
Right.
Yes.
Well, yeah. So I want to talk to James Randi, because James Randi, I guess many years ago, I was amazed when I saw him. I saw a clip of him. Obviously, I'm not old enough, but I saw a clip of him on the Johnny Carson show. Johnny obviously loved magicians, and he was a magician. He was a magician, and he had Uri Geller on when Uri was on the cover of the, I think Time magazine, and people believed he was bending spoons with his mind. Right. And Randi came in there and just like, he's like, let me just replace his spoons with regular spoons without him knowing it. And then he was, and everybody who's watching this right now should, because I'm sure not a lot of people know who Uri Geller is at this point, but he's just like sitting there, I don't know, my energy's off, and Johnny's like, just take your time. It was so awkward and cringy. Yeah. And then I lost a lot of respect for Uri at that point, because every mentalist worth his salt should always have a backup or something extra in his pocket to make something happen. You don't just sit there and say, hey,
I can't do it and then back off. That just, no, I didn't like
He
that
got
at all.
destroyed. He got destroyed. Like,
Yes.
Yeah, Geller's actually a friend of mine, I have to say.
Oh, really?
really?
Yeah, because for me, he is, well, he's an Israeli for one thing, you know, and he has the most incredible charisma, and he could make the birds fly out of the trees and land on him, you know. He's just an amazing liar. And he knows that I know. He knows that I know, and we're friends because of that. And whenever I see him, he says, "Oh, Mark, my favorite skeptic," you know, because I don't care. I look at him as a performer, and I'm not judging him as I possibly should, because I think you can learn something from everybody. And I have learned a lot from Uri Geller, because he made a sea change in magic in around 1969. No one was bending metal with their minds back then. It was absolutely, when magicians first started hearing about it, we were like, what? You know, because up at Stanford, he had scientists that he was fooling the pants off. And it trickled down to LA, and people were like, what do you mean? And I heard a story from my teacher, Jim Hurtak. He went to a big dinner party at Stanford, and he came back to Cal Arts when I was going to school, and he came in the class and he said, there was a guy at this dinner party, he made all the silverware on the table bend. Now, that was a huge exaggeration, but he really believed it, because what Geller did is he went around and bent spoons for people at this party. But the phrase where he said all the silverware on the table bent, I was like, wait a minute, I got to know about how this happened, you know? So immediately as a magician, my mind starts thinking, what could he do? What could he do? So I started more or less studying him. And then when Randi got into it with him, then it became really interesting. So Geller to me he's one of the greatest magicians, but he would never call himself that. I think now he calls himself a mystifier.
A mystifier, wow.
Yeah, but he's just pure bullshit. He is just, if you read his latest book he wrote is about how he was in the Mossad, and he worked for the CIA, and
Right.
That's hilarious.
That's
so
he's just
funny.
an entertainer. He's an entertainer, and that is all. And he
Wow.
knows how to take advantage of the moment. Excuse me, which is probably the most important thing I learned from Uri, was that when you have a moment or a second to do something, after you wear somebody down by boring them to tears, that's when you do what you need to do. And sometimes you just have to have great patience, and you have to have a lot of dialogue to verbal deception to increase that belief.
Interesting.
Right.
Very interesting.